The ash marked the sky above was no longer blue. It was filled with gray smoke and red clouds. Everything looked dead. The buildings, the trees, even the ground itself. Only broken metal, cracked stone, and burnt signs were left. Civilization had fallen long ago, and no one believed in peace anymore. In the middle of this dead city, one human stood quietly. His name was Carter. And he ran a small food stall. It wasn't much, just a pot over a hot barrel and a wooden table, but in a place where most people ate rats or nothing at all. Carter's food smelled like gold. Every morning he cooked a little stew. It was mostly roots and dry meat, but it was hot, it was real, and it was safe. He didn't ask for much in return, maybe a bottle of clean water or a few old batteries. People came and traded what they could, and left quickly, heads low, afraid. Today was quiet. Too quiet. Carter stirred the pot, steam rising in the cold air. No one had come yet, not even the regulars. That's when he heard a soft step. Then another. He looked up, hand on his old knife, eyes scanning the foggy street. Out from behind a broken cart came two figures. Thin, dirty, wrapped in torn cloth, not soldiers. Not raiders, no weapons, no armor, just bones and skin and silence. They were alien girls. Their eyes were too big, their skin a soft gray, covered in ash. One looked around 15, the other maybe 19. They stepped closer, slowly, hands empty, feet bare. Carter narrowed his eyes but didn't speak. The younger one stared at the stew with wide, hungry eyes. The older one knelt down in front of the stall. Then the younger did the same, and then, without a word, they began to untie the cloth on their shoulders. Carter's heart dropped. He stepped around the table and raised a hand. "No," he said firmly. "Stop." The girls froze, fear in their eyes. Carter took a deep breath and looked at them. "You don't need to do that," he said. "Softer now." He pointed at the stew. "You're hungry, right?" The younger one nodded slowly, her lips cracked, eyes full of tears. Carter handed them each a small metal bowl and filled it with the hot stew. They took it like it was magic, like it would disappear if they blinked. They didn't speak, just ate fast, careful and silent. People nearby started to stare. A tall insectoid trader shook his head and walked away. An old alien woman hissed and muttered something in her own tongue. Carter didn't care. He looked at the older girl, her hands shaking as she ate. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked at him, lips tight, and said nothing. The younger one glanced at her sister, then whispered, "Syrah." Carter nodded. "All right, Syrah." He looked at the older girl again, but still she said nothing. That's when the trouble started. A rock flew through the air and hit the table, knocking over a bowl. Syrah cried out and backed away, holding her sister's arm. Carter turned sharply to see 3 alien men across the square. One of them spat at the ground. "No trade for rats." One growled, "You feed them." "You choose them," said another. Carter stared at them, unmoved. "You want food? Bring something." "To trade," he said coldly. The men didn't move forward, but they didn't leave either. They stood and watched, like wolves waiting. Carter turned back to the girls, picked up the fallen bowl, and poured more stew. He gave it back to Syrah. With a small nod, "You're safe here," he said. But deep inside, he knew it wasn't true. Not in this world. Not after everything had burned. When the girls finished, they tried to clean the bowls. Carter waved it off. "Keep them," he said. They hesitated, then nodded gratefully as the sun faded behind thick smoke. Carter packed up. He glanced at the girls still sitting beside the stall, unsure what to do. He had no bed. No walls, just a tarp and some metal poles. But they looked so lost, so broken. "You two got anywhere to go?" he asked. They looked at each other, then slowly shook their heads. Carter sighed. knowing this would bring trouble. Then stay close, he said, but don't talk. And don't move unless I say. They followed him behind the rubble, where he kept his little shelter. He set up a fire and gave them each an old blanket. They didn't thank him with words, but their eyes said everything. As Carter sat down with his old rifle beside him, he watched the sky turn darker. Ash fell slowly, like snow. And somewhere in the distance, he heard a scream echo through the broken city. The world was gone, burned and broken. But tonight, in the middle of all that death, he had fed to starving souls. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something. The fire crackled softly. It was small, barely enough to keep the cold away. But it was the only light in that dead corner of the world. Carter sat cross-legged near the flames, one hand on his old rifle. The alien girls sat across from him, wrapped in worn blankets. Heads down, silent, ash drifted through the air, light as snow. It settled on their hair, their shoulders, and the dirty floor. Sierra shivered, but didn't complain. The older girl, still silent, kept her eyes on the flames like they held the last piece of safety left in the galaxy. Carter broke the silence. "You don't have to stay if you don't trust me," he said. Voice calm. Sierra looked up quickly, shaking her head. "No," she said, almost too quiet to hear. We stay." Carter gave a small nod. He pulled a pouch from his side and handed them a chunk of dry root bread. "Eat slow," he said. "Your stomachs won't like it if you go too fast." Sierra took the bread with both hands, like it was a gift from a god. The older girl waited, her hands in her lap. Carter noticed she hadn't spoken a single word since arriving. He watched her closely and then asked again, "What's her name?" Sierra hesitated, looked at her sister, then back at Carter. "She doesn't talk," she said softly, "not since the cages." That word cages hung heavy in the air. Carter didn't press. Instead, he looked at the older girl with respect. "You're strong," he said. "Whatever happened, you're still here." She blinked slowly, like those words were strange to her ears. Carter reached into his bag and pulled out a piece of old chalk. He placed it on the ground in front of her and gently pushed it forward. "If you can't speak, maybe you can write," he offered. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, her hand reached out, trembling. She picked up the chalk with 2 fingers and began to draw a symbol, curved and careful. Then she paused, and under it, wrote 4 letters in her native tongue. Carter stared at it, then at her. "I don't read that," he said honestly. Sierra leaned forward, looked, then whispered, "It says Lyra." Carter repeated it slowly. "Lyra." The girl Lyra looked up at him, eyes wide and uncertain. He smiled gently. "That's a good name," he said, strong. Suddenly, there was a noise in the distance, metal scraping on stone. All 3 of them froze. Carter moved quickly, putting out the fire with a cloth and signaling the girls to move behind the tarp. He crept forward with the rifle raised, eyes sharp, breath held from the shadows. A figure stumbled into the ruined street, just a beggar, filthy and drunk, dragging a broken cart behind him. Carter relaxed slightly, but didn't lower the weapon. The man looked around, sniffed the air, then wandered off, muttering to himself. Carter returned to the girls who hadn't moved or made a sound. He was impressed. "You 2 are quiet," he said. "That's good. You've been hunted before." Sierra nodded slowly. "Raiders took us from the far moons," she said, voice hollow. "Kept us with others. Traded us, sold us, starved us." Carter didn't ask how they escaped. He could guess, and he didn't want to make them relive it. He just added a bit more wood to the now hidden fire. Letting the heat rise again, he looked up at the ruined buildings around them. Graffiti still covered some of the walls, warnings, hate symbols, and scavenger tags. "This place used to be full of life," he said quietly. "I remember markets, songs, even laughter." Sierra tilted her head. "What?" Happened? Carter chuckled without humor. Same thing that always happens, he said. Greed, war. And fools with too much power. Lyra touched the chalk again and slowly wrote something else. Carter leaned in, squinting at the strange but beautiful marks. Sierra read it aloud. Why do you help us? Carter looked at her, serious now, because no one helped me once. He said, and it nearly killed me. He paused, then added, I survived because one stranger gave me water. Just water. He nodded toward them. I won't be the one who walks past again. Silence filled the space again. But it was different now. Softer, warmer. Like a door had opened between them. Lyra drew a tiny sun with the chalk and placed it next to her name. She smiled just a little, but real, Carter. Looked at the small picture and smiled too. We'll make it to morning, he said. And for the first time in a long time, he believed it. The morning air was cold and thick with smoke. Ash drifted across the broken street like soft snow. But this snow was made of burned homes and dead cities. Carter lit the fire again near his food stall, stirring the small pot of stew. Sierra and Lyra sat beside the ruined wall, quiet, alert, and watching everything. Their eyes no longer looked empty. They still looked tired, but now they were sharp. Like animals that had learned what danger smells like. Carter filled 3 bowls and handed one to each girl. They ate quietly, no longer rushing. He had taught them to chew slowly, to breathe between bites. It wasn't just food anymore, was safety, but peace never lasted long, not in this world. A tall shadow moved near the edge of the square. Then another. Carter froze. His hand resting on the old rifle beside him. 3 aliens walked out from behind a wrecked building. Not traders, not travelers. Raiders. They wore patched armor, their faces hidden behind dark masks. The leader stepped forward, boots crunching on broken glass. You, the human feeding trash? He asked, voice rough. Carter stood slowly, his face calm. This is my stall, he said. They're not trash. The raider laughed, a low, cruel sound. Their property, he said. Runaways, I bet. He looked past Carter at the girl's eyes, hungry like a wolf. We'll take them back, he said. You want to live? Step aside. Sierra gripped Lyra's arm. Both girls shaking, but Lyra didn't hide. She stood up. Slow but steady. She had no weapon, just strength in her spine. Carter didn't move from his place. You don't own them, he said. They're free now. The raider's hand went to his belt, pulling out a dull knife. You think freedom comes without a price? He growled. No trade without blood. Human. Carter stayed still. He had faced worse, once, years ago. He'd stared down a starving mutant wolf with nothing but a stick. This wasn't fear, it was decision. He slowly picked up the rifle, not aiming it, just holding it. You want to fight? Carter asked. You'll get one? The 3 raiders stepped forward. The square felt colder, heavier, like time had slowed down. But then another voice echoed from the ruins. Back off. It came from a rooftop. A second later, a small metal object dropped from above and rolled across the ground. A grenade. The raiders jumped back in panic. Weapons raised, but the grenade didn't explode. It clicked open and sprayed red smoke everywhere. Confused, coughing, the raiders turned and ran, disappearing into the ash. Carter looked up toward the roof. A hooded figure crouched above, holding a small device. Get out while you can, the stranger said. Then vanished into the smoke. For a long moment, no one spoke. Carter finally breathed again and lowered the rifle. Sierra collapsed into a sitting position, trembling. Lyra just stared at the smoke, jaw clenched tight. They'll be back, Carter said, voice hard. Next time with more. He packed the food quickly, his hands moving fast but calm. We're moving, he told the girls. We can't stay here anymore. Where will we go? Sierra asked, voice shaking. Carter pointed to the east. "There's an old checkpoint near the river, abandoned," he said. "If the bridge still holds, we might make it to the highlands." Lyra looked at the broken street, then back at Carter. "Why risk your life for us?" she finally said, her voice hoarse but steady. Carter paused, then looked her in the eyes. "Because you're not things," he said. "You're people." They walked for hours, staying close to the walls, hiding behind broken trucks and burnt signs. Every time they heard footsteps or engines, they ducked, silent as ghosts. But even with the fear, something was changing. Sierra started to hum softly an old song from her home world. Lyra no longer flinched when Carter looked at her. And Carter. He began to hope again, just a little, when they reached the edge of the city. The view was terrible and beautiful. Blackened buildings stretched out behind them. But ahead, green hills rose, far and untouched. The sky was still gray, but there was space, open and wide. Carter turned to the girls. "If we make it to the river, we have a chance," he said. They nodded, both of them holding on to each other behind them in the ruins. A loud horn echoed. The raiders were back, and they were hunting. But the human and the two alien girls were already moving, one step at a time, into the unknown. No trade without blood, they had said. Carter knew they were right because he was ready to pay it. The wind howled through the dead forest like a voice full of warning. Leaves did not grow here, any more only blackened tree trunks and scorched earth. Smoke from distant fires drifted. In low clouds, thick and bitter, Carter led the two alien girls along a narrow path. Steps careful, his blade tied to his side. They had walked since morning, but now the sky was turning dark again. "We stop here," Carter said at last, pointing to a ruined bunker half buried in the dirt. It was small, rusted, and almost invisible under the ash and vines. But inside it was dry, and it had thick walls that could keep danger out. Sierra crawled in first, coughing from the dust. Lyra followed without a word, her eyes scanning the trees behind them. Carter came in last, pulled the door shut, and set a metal rod against it. Then he lit a fire, small and quiet. Deep inside the bunker, the warmth filled the space slowly. They didn't speak for a while, only listened to the sound of wind and far-off howls. Carter passed them small pieces of dried meat and old potatoes. They ate in silence, chewing slowly, faces pale from fear and hunger after they finished. Carter took out his knife and began to clean it. The fire's light reflected off the blade, making it look almost alive. Sierra watched it closely, her voice soft. "Will we have to fight again?" Carter didn't look up. "Maybe," he said. "Raiders don't forget." Lyra shifted beside her sister. Still silent, still tense, Carter looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Have you ever fought before?" Lyra blinked, surprised, then slowly shook her head. "Only ran," she whispered. "And hid." Carter nodded. "You'll need to do more than that now," he said, "because if they find us tonight, you won't be running." Outside, the sky turned black, and the wind grew stronger. It wasn't a normal wind. It smelled of oil and burning metal. Carter stood and walked to the small slit in the bunker wall. Through it, he could see distant lights moving. "Fast vehicles," he said under his breath. "They're searching." He moved quickly, grabbing old cans and placing them near the bunker's edge. "Trip alarms," he said to the girls. "If anything moves out there, we'll hear it." Then he looked at them both, serious now. "If they come, I want you two to crawl out through that back hole," he said, pointing to a broken vent. "Follow the river downhill. Don't stop for anything." Sierra started to cry quietly. "But what about you?" Carter didn't smile, didn't lie. "I'll slow them down," he said. "That's all I need to do." Lyra stared at him, then did something no one expected. She reached out and touched his hand. Her voice was rough, but strong. "No," she said. Not again, before Carter could answer. A sharp clink echoed outside. The cans had moved. All three froze, eyes wide. Carter snuffed the fire with a cloth and pulled out his blade and rifle. Footsteps came closer, slow, heavy, confident. A flashlight beam flicked past the slit in the wall, then another. "They're here," Carter whispered. He pointed to the vent. "Go," he said. But the girls didn't move. The door shook once, then again. Harder, a voice called out. Deep and mocking. "Little human, little pet girls." The voice growled, "Time's up." Carter gritted his teeth, then stepped toward the door. Key braced his body against the wall beside it, holding his knife tight. The metal groaned as someone tried to push it open. Then, with a loud crack, the door burst open. A masked raider stepped inside. Weapon raised, but Carter was faster. He slammed the blade upward into the raider's side, twisting hard. The man dropped, gurgling. Carter yanked the rifle from his back and fired once, hitting a second raider outside. "Run!" He shouted. Sierra grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her toward the vent. But before they could escape, another raider leaped in through the broken wall. This one grabbed Lyra by the arm, trying to pull her back. She screamed, then did something one expected. She bit down on his wrist with sharp alien teeth. Hard enough to make him howl. Carter spun and stabbed the man through the chest. Blood sprayed across the wall. Then silence. 3 bodies lay in the dirt. The air thick with smoke and the smell of death. Carter dropped to one knee, breathing hard. Sierra held Lyra tightly. Both of them shaking. "We have to go," Carter said. Through gritted teeth, "We stay here, we die, together." They crawled through the vent and into the forest. Behind them, the bunker burned quietly, the fire rising like a warning to the world. They didn't stop until the stars were above them. Far and clear, Carter sat down on a rock, blood on his hands, knife still in his grip. He looked at the girls, both alive, both fierce in their own way. "You fought," he said, nodding to Lyra. She looked away, ashamed. But Carter placed a hand on her shoulder. "That was brave," he said. "You didn't run." Lyra didn't answer, but this time she didn't cry either. She just sat beside him, watching the fire grow smaller behind them. The blade had spoken tonight, and fire had answered. Now the only question was what would come next. The stars blinked above the black hills, cold and quiet. Carter sat by a dying fire, his shirt stained with blood, not all of it his own. Sierra was curled beside a fallen log, fast asleep at last. But Lyra sat alone at the edge of the trees, staring at nothing, her face like stone. Carter watched her, the way she held her knees to her chest, the way she didn't blink. She hadn't said a word since the fight. Even when Carter tried to thank her for what she did, she just looked away. He stood slowly and walked over, his footsteps soft on the ash-covered ground. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She didn't answer, but she didn't tell him no either. So he sat a few feet away, close enough to share the silence. The wind picked up, cold and dry, rustling the burned leaves back there. Carter said quietly, "You saved her life." Still no answer. He glanced sideways. "Where'd you learn to fight like that?" Lyra didn't move, didn't speak, but her fingers dug into her arms, tight. The fire crackled in the background, far away now. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice dry like sand. "I didn't learn it," she said. "I remembered it." Carter blinked, surprised. "Remembered?" he asked. She looked at him, eyes dark and hollow. "I was a daughter of a city leader," she said. "Back when there were cities, my mother taught me to stand tall. My father taught me to use words, but the war taught me to bite." Carter stayed silent, letting her speak. "They came at night," Lyra continued. "Raiders, slavers, worse. They burned my home. chained me and my little sister, threw us into cages. They told me I was pretty, that I'd be sold first. She swallowed hard, but I fought one, bit him. And he cut my face. She turned her head slowly and pulled her hair aside. Carter saw the scar now, long and thin, running from her jaw to her neck. He hadn't noticed before it was hidden beneath layers of dust and silence. That's why. I stopped talking, she whispered, because no one cared what I said. They only wanted my silence, my fear. Carter looked down at the ground. I care, he said softly. I care what you say. Lyra looked at him, and this time, her eyes weren't dead. They were filled with something new, uncertainty, maybe even hope. No one's ever said that to me, she said. Not since. Not since it all fell. There was a pause. A heavy one. Then she asked, why didn't you trade us like the others? Carter shook his head slowly, because I saw two girls who needed food. Not fear, he said. I've been hungry before. I've been hunted. But no one should have to trade their body to stay alive. Lyra closed her eyes. She didn't cry, but her breathing shook. Just for a second. You remind me of someone, she said quietly. Carter raised an eyebrow. Who? My older brother, she answered. Before they killed him, he tried to protect us too, and died for it. The fire behind them snapped loudly, making them both turn. Sira stirred in her sleep but didn't wake. Lyra looked at her sister for a long moment, then back at Carter. If anything happens to me, she said slowly, promise. You'll take care of her. Carter frowned. Don't talk like that. Promise me. She repeated, stronger now, please. Carter didn't look away. I promise, he said. But only if you promise to stay alive, too. Lyra gave a weak smile, the first one he had ever seen from her. I'll try, she said, for her, then. From the woods behind them, they heard something. A soft crunch, one step, maybe two. Carter was on his feet in a second, rifle ready. Lyra stood beside him without a word, holding a sharp stick like a blade. Another crunch closer, this time. Carter aimed into the trees, his finger near the trigger. But then, a voice, don't shoot, it called. I'm not a threat. From behind the trees came a figure, a young alien boy, hands raised, clothes torn. I saw your fire, he said. I've been running too. He looked no older than Sira, thin and scared. Carter lowered the rifle slowly. What's your name? He asked. Dick, the boy said. Please, don't send me away. Lyra stepped forward, eyes narrowing. Are you alone? Dick nodded quickly. They took my parents, he whispered. I escaped. Carter looked at Lyra. She looked at Sira, still asleep and safe. Then she looked back at the boy. Come with us, she said quietly. But no lies, no stealing, and no noise when we move. Dick nodded fast, thankful. Carter gave her a proud look. You're becoming a leader, he said with a small smile. Lyra didn't reply, but her eyes sparkled just a little in the starlight. The scar on her neck was still there, but it no longer told the story of pain. Now it whispered of survival, strength, and something new. Voice, the scarred sister had finally spoken, and the world was listening. Asterisk rain fell in cold sheets, soaking the dirt path and turning it into black mud. Each drop felt heavy, like the sky itself was crying for the world that had died. Carter pushed forward, his rifle wrapped in cloth, his coat dripping behind him. Sira walked with her arms around a shivering Dick. Lyra followed silently, eyes sharp, holding a sharpened spear she had made herself. They had been walking since dawn, and now it was almost night again. Their last food had been a dry root 2 days ago. Even Carter's steps were slow now. Heavy from exhaustion there, he said suddenly. Pointing toward a rocky hill, between two collapsed towers, stood the broken skeleton of a bridge. Beyond it, green hills, real trees, and faint light. A survivor's camp, maybe, or just hope, but between them and that bridge stood a roadblock, a wall of metal crates and scrap, manned by figures in black coats and visors, armed, armored, and watching. Mercenaries, Carter said under his breath. Not raiders, not soldiers, he added. They sell safety for a price. Lyra narrowed her eyes. What kind of price? Carter didn't answer. He already knew the answer. And it was one he hoped he'd never have to face again. They approached slowly, hands visible, no sudden moves. A tall man with a scar down his cheek stepped forward, holding a black shotgun. He looked at Carter and smiled without warmth. Well, well, he said. A human with pets. They're not pets, Carter said coldly. They're survivors. The man glanced at Lyra and Sierra, then at Dick. All kinds of creatures survive these days, he said, but not all. Are welcome? We just want to cross the bridge, Carter said. That's all. The mercenary rubbed his chin. Then you'll need to pay, he said. 2 rations per head, or trade. Carter looked at his bajempty. He had no food left, no tools, nothing. I've got nothing, he said honestly. But I can work, repair, guard, dig. The mercenary laughed. A cold sound. Work. He sneered. That's not what we're after. He stepped closer and looked at Lyra. But her? She's worth a night of comfort. Carter's fists clenched. She's not for sale, he said sharply. The mercenary tilted his head. Then you don't cross, he said. Simple as that. Carter stared him down, his jaw tight. Rain dripped from his hair, from his coat, from his soul. He turned and looked at the girls, at Dick. They were soaked, hungry, shaking. Sierra stepped forward, voice trembling. Please, sir, she said. We'll die if we stay out here. The mercenary leaned down, eye level with her. Then die, he said, unless your master gives me what I want. Carter's hand moved slowly to his belt, where his knife rested, but Lyra touched his arm. Stopping him, she stepped in front of Carter, raising her voice. Wait, she said. Let me speak to him alone. No, Carter growled. You. Don't have to, I do, she said. Let me try. The mercenary raised an eyebrow as Lyra approached. She stood tall, her wet hair stuck to her skin. The scar on her neck shining in the rain. You want payment? She asked, voice cold. Then listen to my offer. The mercenary smiled. I'm listening. You let us all pass, she said, and I give you something better than a night. The man looked confused. I give you my word, she said, that when this world is rebuilt, I will remember who showed mercy. He laughed hard, spitting on the ground. Your word. He mocked. What's that worth? Lyra stepped closer, inches from him. You know what my scar means? She said, you know who I was. I was daughter of Counselor Viren of the Terran Empire. Kill me now, and you've earned an enemy who forgives nothing. The man hesitated, something flickering behind his eyes. He looked at Carter, then at the children. He clicked his tongue, disappointed. I could have had a warm night, he muttered. Then he stepped aside. Go, he said sharply, before I change my mind. Carter grabbed Lyra's hand, Kay pulling her back gently. They crossed the barricade. Quickly, not looking back, as soon as they reached the other side. Sierra ran into Carter's arms, crying. Dick sat down in the mud, too tired to move. Carter turned to Lyra. What you said? Was it true? He asked. Lyra looked away. It doesn't matter, she said softly. It worked. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder. That was brave, he said, but risky. She nodded, then whispered, mercy has a price. Sometimes the price is pride. They walked across the broken bridge together. Rain still falling, but beyond it, the hills waited green, wide and full of promise. For the first time, the stars looked less cold, and in that moment, Carter believed that maybe mercy had a future too. The hills were quiet, almost too quiet. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the heavy smell of mud and smoke. Carter led the group through the tall grass, one hand always on his rifle. They had crossed the bridge, past the mercenary checkpoint, but safety was still a word no one trusted. In the distance stood an old house, barely standing but whole enough to block wind. Its windows were broken, roof half collapsed, but it had walls. And that was more than they had in days. "We rest here," Carter said, his voice low but firm. Lyra helped Sierra inside while Carter checked each room. Dick followed, eyes wide and quiet. The house was abandoned, but signs of old life still lingered. Burned photos on the wall, a child's shoe by the door, a cracked mirror. Carter closed the main door behind them and dropped his bag. "Tonight," he said, "we cook." Sierra's eyes lit up with surprise. "Real food?" she asked. Carter smiled weakly. "The last of what I had." He pulled out a sealed pouch. Inside were dried herbs, 3 small meat cubes, and 1 yellow root. He had kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment. That moment was now. They gathered around the old metal stove. Carter lit a fire and placed the pot on top. As the stew began to boil, the smell filled the house. Warm, rich, comforting, like a memory you thought was lost forever. Lyra sat beside him, eyes on the pot. "You saved that food for us?" she asked. Carter nodded. "You've come this far," he said. "You earned a real meal." Dick leaned against the wall, shivering but smiling. Sierra giggled for the first time in days. The house didn't feel empty anymore. Carter handed out the bowls one by one. Steam rose into their faces as they each took a bite. Silence fell, but not the bad kind. It was the kind that made hearts feel full. "This tastes like my mother's stew," Lyra whispered. "It tastes like home." They ate slowly, each spoonful reminding them they were still alive, still human, no matter the planet, no matter the war. But peace is never free. Just as Carter sat back to rest, he heard a sound click, then a whisper of movement outside. He stood up, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the door. "Stay here," he said. "Don't speak, don't move." Carter stepped out into the front hallway, eyes sharp. A shadow passed near the window, then another. He raised his weapon, finger near the trigger. A voice spoke from outside. "You took something from us," it growled. Carter's jaw tightened. "You're raiders," he said. "You followed us. Give the girls back." The voice snapped, "And we let you walk." Carter didn't answer. Instead, he took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped out into the night. The moon lit the field, and 6 raiders stood in a half circle, weapons ready. "You won't take them," Carter said. "Not now, not ever." The leader, a tall brute with metal on his arms, grinned. "You're alone," he said. "You'll die." Carter lowered his rifle just slightly. "I won't die tonight," he said, "but some of you will." The first shot rang out like thunder. Chaos exploded. Carter fired twice, hitting one in the leg, another in the chest, but a bullet grazed his side. Hot pain shot through him. He fell back, bleeding, breath heavy. Inside, Lyra heard the shot and stood. "No," she whispered, grabbing a metal rod. She ran out the door. Followed by Sarah and Dick, she saw Carter down, blood on his coat. Without thinking, she screamed and charged the nearest raider. The rod struck his jaw. He fell, stunned. Sarah grabbed Carter's rifle and fired, missing but scaring 2 away. Dick threw rocks, crying out, wild with fear. The last 2 raiders backed off, shocked at the resistance. "We're not worth the bullets," one muttered, and they ran, disappearing into the night. The silence after was louder than the gunfire. Lyra dropped the rod and ran to Carter. He was bleeding badly, his hands cold. "No," she cried. "Stay awake, stay with me." Carter opened his eyes. "Barely. You fought," he whispered. Lyra nodded. Because of you. He smiled weakly. I didn't. Cook that stew just for the taste, he said. I cooked it. Because I wanted you to feel like you belonged. Tears fell from Syrah's eyes as she held his hand. You're not allowed to die, she said. You promised. Carter chuckled just once. I'm not dying yet, he said. But if I do, it's worth it. They brought him inside, patched his wound with cloth and old bandages. He didn't sleep, but he stayed awake, watching the girls huddle together in the corner. Alive, safe, and full, morning came, golden and gentle. Birds chirped in the distance for the first time in weeks. Carter sat up slowly. Pain sharp in his ribs, but he smiled. Lyra walked over with a bowl in her hands. It was stew, what little was left from last night. Warmed over again? Our turn, she said, placing it in his hands. You gave us a reason to live. She whispered, now we'll give you a reason to stay. Carter looked at them, three broken souls who were no longer broken. He took a bite and closed his eyes. It was the best meal of his life, and maybe the start of a new one.